Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's discussion on best practices for integrating the HP UCMDB with the ServiceNow Service Desk. This is a topic that we've received several questions on over the past few months from a number of different organizations. And so we decided to put on this webinar to address a lot of the questions that we've been receiving, and also to add clarity around how the UCMDB plays a meaningful role in supporting IT service management. My name is Anu Papu. I've been working with Configure Consulting for about 5 years now, focusing on configuration, change, and asset management. And presenting with me today are Justin Harrison and Robert Geen, two of our top consultants from the CMS and ITSM practice of Configure Consulting. So getting started here today, we'll just cover some webinar guidelines. Please keep in mind that this webinar is being recorded and that all lines are currently muted. We'd ask that you not put your phone on hold or answer any other calls while in this session. And we also encourage you to post any questions you may have in the question manager on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll address all of those questions at the end of the session. Moving into the agenda, we'd like to get started by telling you a little bit about Configure Consulting. We have a lot of experience empowering organizations with efficiency, stability, and top performance in the delivery of business services. We do this through our primary practice areas listed on the right-hand side of the screen. And one of those is the configuration and change management practice, which will be the focus of today's discussion. We're going to be talking about, as I mentioned, the UCMDB to ServiceNow integration. And we'll start out by discussing how that fits into the broader SACM processes. We'll then focus in on specifically the interactions between UCMDB and IT service management, discussing the anatomy of the UCMDB to ServiceNow integration, Configure Consulting's framework or tactical approach for the integration, and finally a case study of how this was implemented and how it's been successful in the past. Once again, please note that we've listed Q&A for the end of the session. We encourage you to post any questions you may have in that question manager on the right of your screen. So getting started with SACM. At a high level, SACM, or Service, Asset, and Configuration Management, is built upon the interactions between the three processes that you see here: asset management, IT service management, and config management. And increasingly, we're finding, as I'm sure a lot of the folks on the call have noticed, that many organizations are driving SACM processes from within a multi-vendor environment. And by that we mean one or more of these are being supported by a different vendor platform from the others. And that's something that's perfectly normal in today's operating environment. That's also what brings us into today's discussion. We're going to be focusing on how configuration management, and the UCMDB in particular, can drive efficiencies when tied into ITIL processes in this multi-vendor framework. We're going to be using the integration between UCMDB and the ServiceNow Service Desk as our example for today. But it's important to keep in mind that a lot of these topics are applicable to integrations between the UCMDB and other third-party service desks, and certainly between the UCMDB and HP's ITSM platforms, those being Service Manager and Service Anywhere. So integration to ITSM is far and away one of the most common use cases for the UCMDB. So let's talk about why that's the case and how the UCMDB adds value here. The UCMDB is your solution set for configuration management. And this engine is comprised of two key components: Universal Discovery, or UD, which performs automated discovery of configuration items, relationships, and changes across the environment. That discovered data is then visualized, analyzed, and modeled within the UCMDB. This solution set is industry-leading for a few key reasons. Firstly, for its breadth of discovery across different technology platforms, this is virtually unmatched across the marketplace. And secondly, its ability to discover and model meaningful relationships, which adds a lot of context to change, incident, and many other ITSM processes. The UCMDB has several out-of-the-box integration jobs, which allow for a lot of that rich data to be consumed by other platforms across the IT organization. When consumed by ITSM specifically, we see the key benefits listed here, amongst others. So consistently, we see reduced mean time to repair as operators are able to route or manage tickets appropriately based on CI data being auto-populated. The ability to correlate tickets helps identify that, for instance, 6 open incidents may be linked to a recently closed change ticket based on a common group of CIs involved. That's critical information for ITSM teams, in particular triage whenever things go wrong or whenever we do have incidents. Importantly, populating the service desk with CI attributes and relationships does drive informed decision-making across all ITSM processes. It's also critical in terms of meeting some of the most common audit requirements. For instance, the requirement to have a CI associated with every ticket in the service desk. So now that we see the value, let's discuss the integration itself that does facilitate these benefits. What you're looking at here is a very high-level picture of the UCMDB to ServiceNow integration. UCMDB being on the left, ServiceNow Service Desk being on the right. We clearly see that this integration is bidirectional, allowing for data to be pushed from the UCMDB into the Service Desk and pulled from the Service Desk into UCMDB. The first, the push, is the vehicle that we'd use to populate the Service Desk with CIs, relationships, and business service models, just to name a few. And the orange pull allows data from ServiceNow to be pulled into the UCMDB. What this does is it ensures that both config and ITSM teams are truly leveraging and optimizing resources or data on both sides of the fence. And so this is the integration that makes that happen. A few key points. This integration leverages out-of-the-box mappings and capabilities from the UCMDB for push and pull sides of the integration. There's a lot of focus on leveraging existing data wherever it may lie in the UCMDB or in the service desk. That kind of data, such as business service models or sometimes discovered attributes on the UCMDB side, non-discoverable attributes on the service desk side, does drive a lot of value for both config and ITSM processes. It's also important to note, and this is something we'll discuss later on as well, that connections here help ensure that everyone is speaking from the same script. For example, if a service desk analyst is opening a ticket against a CI, a change manager has closed out a change record on a related CI, and an incident team is performing triage on a business application mapped to both of these CIs, it's helpful when we all share a consistent picture of those CIs that are involved and really understand how our actions may be interrelated. A lot of this is driven by the relationship data. That is truly one of the strengths of the UCMDB and UD solution set. Your discovered relationship data as well as your modeled relationship data drives a lot of risk management, change, incident, and other capabilities supporting impact analysis and triage. We also wanted to show you a little bit of a look under the hood on what the key components of the integration look like. So on the left-hand side, what you're seeing is an image of a business application map in the UCMDB. This is our payroll application. You can see payroll up here. And as we navigate to each lower level, you're seeing the CIs and relationships that make up this application. So for instance, you can clearly see that the payroll application is made up of these 7 servers. One of those servers, ProdDB, which is right over here where my mouse is, also has a relationship to another application, accounts payable. This type of relationship mapping and visualization, which is a combination of discovered data as well as map data, is what drives ITSM teams to make informed decisions about risk, change impact, and response. On the right-hand side, you see a snippet of the XML mapping file that's a part of this integration. We see here we're seeing the direct mapping of attributes from UCMDB to ServiceNow. One of the most important takeaways on this screen here is how foundational and straightforward the logic is behind this integration. So for instance, the orange arrow that's a little bit lower on the screen is pointing to the line that translates the discovered model attribute from the UCMDB to its equivalent on the ServiceNow side. So now that we've shown you a little bit about the UCMDB to ServiceNow integration and explained why it's important, I'll pass the ball over to Justin to walk through our tactical implementation and also a case study that highlights some of the key aspects of how this is applied in the real world.
Thank you, Anu. At Configure Consulting, we've proven a tactical approach for implementing this integration. We've broken it out into 3 different phases, one being a data process and mapping workshop phase, then tailoring and executing the integration, and then identifying efficiencies in process development. First stage, through the analysis tools, data and processing supporting the ITSM activities, this involves interactions with the SMEs, the key stakeholders across the teams, the process teams or owners, and any other groups that are involved. These sessions help us establish a detailed integration model covering the technical architecture, the process alignment, and data mapping in a way that's validating the key stakeholders. Next, we tailor the integration based on the outcome of the workshops in the first phase. We work with out-of-the-box queries and mapping files within the UCMDB for the integration to ServiceNow. The out-of-the-box resources provide a stable foundation connection between the UCMDB and ServiceNow, and we'll cover this in a case study later. We tailor this process to meet the unique reconciliation requirements between the UCMDB and ServiceNow. Once the integration is complete, we undergo the testing and troubleshooting phases before we push to production. This is geared to ensure that the requirements of the stakeholders, including user groups, process owners, and tool teams, get their needs met. Third stage is critically important. This is where we answer the question, how will we know if we were successful? Our team helps organize, identify metrics and KPIs that can be measured and tracked over time to quantify the success resulting from the integration. An example would be that we worked with a large airline that chose to track a percentage of their tickets open with a CI associated them and use this as their KPI to determine their success. The number was very low because the UCMDB integration to the service desk, a lot of this was due to the fact that the service desk was being manually populated without consistent naming conventions or other key attributes in the CI. It led to a lot of confusion and wasting time and redundant efforts. They saw the number rise following the integration, and today over 95% of their tickets have a CI associated. The number represents efficiency, reduced mean time to repair, and a much higher degree of accuracy. Now that we've discussed the process that we use, let's apply this to a case study. We recently completed an integration between the UCMDB and a fresh install of the request management module ServiceNow. The client was a large multinational company looking to populate the request management module with CIs from the CMDB to help the operators classify the requests properly, route the tickets accordingly, and make informed decisions. They also wanted the integration to lay a foundation of data to be consumed by the modules that may be implemented in the future, such as change and incident. Scope of the integration included all the servers, the business elements, IP addresses, clusters, and business service models. This project followed the same workshops, the integration to the quantifying our wins model that we discussed in the earlier slide. The requirements gathering involved workshops with the stakeholders across config, request, and ITSM tools and process owners. Establishing the connectivity between the UCMDB and ServiceNow is a straightforward process using the out-of-the-box integration job. When tailoring the integration to specific needs of the client, we made modifications to the necessary queries and jar files on the push integration. And also at the request of the client, we had some key attributes added to the ServiceNow side. Some of these requirements involved adding attributes such as a severity attribute on the business elements. And this is a great example of the best use of UCMDB data, an attribute that had been modeled and was being accurately tracked already. Another part of this task was the reconciliation, which is really critical to any integration. In this instance, we approached reconciliation by sending the UCMDB data into a fresh install ServiceNow. The data was pushed to ServiceNow at the same time CIs in the UCMDB were tagged with a unique ServiceNow identifier. This ensured the consistency of the data mapping between both systems. During the testing phase of the project, we were focused on validating the integration met all the requirements identified during the earlier workshops. We also looked to detect and troubleshoot any inconsistencies around the mapping of the attributes and lookup tables. This effort involved coordination between the implementation team, the configuration management, and technical service teams. We took the steps to schedule these individual jobs, keeping in mind the scheduling of other ServiceNow and universal discovery activities, such as the Windows and CAD meetings. In this project, we defined the success by a percentage of the service requests that were auto-routed correctly without user intervention. Those meant a higher number meant less time and faster results overall. It's also important to have everyone speaking from the same script when it came to CIs, their attributes, and other key factors. The CMDB foundation was implemented in this integration, was later consumed by the ITSM process, including change and incident. As a consulting team, one of our key measurements of success is the knowledge transfer. We strive to ensure that the tools team had the necessary training and knowledge transfer to maintain the integration in routine tweaks or modifications that might be involved in other day-to-day management of the tool. So this covers the key aspects of the case study. If you have any questions, please post them on this question manager to the right. And now I'll pass back over to Anu.
Thanks, Justin. Before we move on to next steps, I just wanted to highlight one of the key aspects of what Justin said. When we did that particular integration, the focus was not only technical data mapping and connection of the tools, rather we were also focused on process alignment, aligning to this organization's existing processes for requests, as well as keeping in mind the roadmap for additional ITSM processes to be implemented. That's something that was an important part of this case study, as well for all of our projects. In terms of next steps, we'd ask that you do reach out to us if you'd like further information on the content that we've gone through today. We've done several projects in this area and really do have a wealth of experience on the subject. So in the event that you do have any questions on the nature of config management to ITSM integrations, if you've got any specific questions based on concerns in your own environment, or even if you'd like some guidance in terms of identifying those metrics or KPIs to quantify your success, please reach out to us and we're happy to support on that. At this time, it looks like we've got quite a few questions come through, so we will switch to the Q&A section of the webinar. Rob, who has already introduced himself on the call, will be handling these questions. So Rob, the first question that I see is, in ServiceNow, is there a concept of lookup tables for linking tabular data? Does the HP UCMDB integration support these?
So there is a concept of lookup tables, and the integration does support it out of the box. So basically, any attribute can be mapped to a lookup table. as long as its data set is going to be unique. There's a lot of examples of how this gets used, but just a few is data center names, company model names, and pretty much any sort of data that can fit into a drop-down list and that you want to auto-populate any sort of changes to the data down onto the CI data. So, for example, if you wanted to change the name of a company without actually having to go through and change it on all the different CIs, you could just update it in that lookup table and the linkage would automatically update it.
Okay, makes sense. The second question that I'm seeing here, Rob, is our organization has a lot of service-to-business application relationships in ServiceNow. Is it possible to reuse this data in the HP UCMDB?
So this is a very good question because this is commonly asked. Usually service level data going, business service level data going down to a business app, usually it's done manually within the UCMDB or it comes from a third-party source. So in this case, ServiceNow could definitely be that source. Out of the box, the bidirectional integration supports pulling back those relationships and even those business services themselves. Now the good thing about that is if you have other manual attributes that you've pre-populated on those business apps and business services, they can automatically be populated back over into the UCMDB for uses that you might have for them. So it's a very good idea to do that.
Okay, great. Another question that we're seeing here is, our organization uses ServiceNow for change management. Can you talk about some specific functionality enablements that having CMDB data in ServiceNow delivers for change? I think we've covered some of these in the webinar itself, but if you've got a few others, I think that'd be very valuable for the audience, Rob.
Yeah, definitely. I can think of a few that are fairly common amongst some of the clients and some of the work we've done in the past. So the first that comes to mind is change impact analysis. This is actually one of the biggest uses of CMDB data, so that you can see scenarios where multiple changes are affecting multiple CIs, and once you start getting CIs attached to those change records, you can really start seeing how many of them actually collide with each other. So usually you don't want to do multiple changes on the same server at the same time because it increases the risk of a failure, right? So the CMDB data can be used to not only pull that picture, but also other pictures such as they all run the same business app. So you have multiple servers and they all run the same business app. Now, one of the things that is also really important too in a lot of cases, whether you're doing it automatically or manually, is being able to see the indirect relationships as well. So you may be doing a change on one server and a change on another server, but when you look at it in total, it may not at first look like they affect the same applications. But when you really start looking at the business app data that flows down to the infrastructure level, you start to see that even though this one server doesn't affect the same business app, that business app actually uses the business app that it does support. So that's one use case that it can be used. Another popular use case is enablement of approvals. So without having CMDB data, it's really hard sometimes to get the proper approvals to do a change. So if you don't have CIs assigned to a change record, it's really hard to automate that approval process to be able to send the approvals off to the proper people. And when you have improper people approving changes, it adds risk to the overall process because they may not be experts in that field and they're approving it without really truly knowing what the effect of it is. So that's a very popular use case, is to try and automate those approval processes so that there's a lot less work of trying to run around figuring out who should be approving this and more work actually getting it properly approved and implementing it. Okay,
great. And one more question that comes through. This is our last question for today, unless anyone has any others that they'd like to post. This one is, on average, how long does it take to perform this integration, and what are some of the factors involved in determining that?
So that's kind of dependent on the size of the organization and the amount of data they want to transfer over to ServiceNow. I mean, our typical projects run from about 4 to 8 weeks. It really depends, because there's several steps you have to go through, which we kind of went through earlier in this webinar. And really the amount of data you want to send over is the main one, right? So if you only have a few servers you want to send over, a few server types compared to hundreds of CI types, it's much quicker than that if you do have hundreds of CI types you want to send over. So it really comes down to the data needs of the organizations and also the amount of processes they're feeding. Because once you start adding in different processes, they all have different needs, which causes your data dictionary to increase and increase. So typically we're looking at about 4 to 8 weeks for the most part.
Okay, that seems like a good average of the different projects we've seen. So guys, that concludes the questions that we had for today. Certainly following this session, you may think of others, and if that's the case, we do encourage you to reach out to us. We thank you very much for your attention. We'll be posting the recorded webinar up on our website, and we'll share the link with those interested. We also have a short survey following this webinar, so if you could take a minute to answer the questions there, that would be very much appreciated. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.